Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. We are here for a mission to liberate Mother Africa. I go by the name Bukoko Sajefo. I was given an English name which I refused to have, and I'm in the process of changing the name. And my main aim is to share ideas about our Mother Africa. It's under the role of Africa in the modern world, in politics, economics, and sociology. Africa has been undermined for a long time because of so many issues, but some are homegrown, some have engineered from outside world. So on my channel, I propose to share African ideas. Not that good scholar, but I share a lot about my Mother Africa. Point number one, we need to know ourselves. We need to know where we came from. The African history has a very long perspective, but because of oral tradition, which has some limitations, which has some biasness, we haven't been able to come up with the right content about our Mother Africa. But in my channel, I want to try as much as I can to come up with as much more better for our Mother Africa. So from the word go, let's begin. And today I'd like to begin with the topic how Africa is poor and who have made Africa poor. So the topic is the underdevelopment of Africa. I will cite some citations from various books that I've read, gone through them. Some have become practical, some have failed to work. But the most important book in my discourse will be How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, the Pan-African and African American who was killed for his good ideas about Mother Africa. It is good to note that Africa before colonization, before slavery age, we were somewhere. And Walter Rodney reminds us that we used to live in societies where life was for sustenance. Life was not one to get all at the expense of the other. Life was about survival. We used to manipulate the environment for the benefit of all. But nowadays we have capitalism, which is killing us. A brother having enough, more than enough for himself, for his children, but the neighbor is going to bed hungry. That's the thing that Walter says. It has cost us much. So before slavery, before colonization, Africa was somewhere. Before that, Africa was doing its own activities. For example, in science, we are using much. Construction, we are doing much. In food sustenance, we are doing much. But now, with the time, slavery came. Slavery, first of all, it was homegrown. Some communities were practicing it, but again, for survival. The most dangerous form of slavery was brought by Europeans, especially in the 15th century, under the transatlantic slave trade, where millions of Africans were shipped to Caribbean and America after the discovery of what they call the new lands, where now Africans were used as labor in European farms for little compensation from European traders. So the Africans were taken from Gambia, from what is called modern day Equatorial Guinea, from Nigeria, from Ghana, and they were taken away to America. Some opted to die by drowning in the Atlantic Ocean, simply because it is better to die than to suffer forever. So all those humiliations, we went through them, we worked for them for 200 years. And Europe is doing much the way it is because of that slave trade. America is a superpower because of slave trade. So after that, they now came here in Africa, now to colonize us. They thought that it was not just good to control us from elsewhere. They were now to come back home here in what we call Africa, so as now to manipulate us, to use our labor, use our land to manipulate even our minds by giving us the so-called the Western education. Is the Western education a good thing? Is it working? Is it practical to our circumstances? They also brought us religion, and religion was a gateway to Mother Africa. The religion came in two folds. The first one was Islam. Islam came by the sword. You say you accept or you'll be killed. Christianity came by the gun. If you don't accept, then you are to be forced to accept the way to cross. But now remember, Africans had their own way of life. They had their own God. They have told us they are gods. We had their own ancestors, which were quite practical in what they were doing. From that point of view, from colonial point of view, Europe sat somewhere in Berlin in 1884, 1885, then manipulated Africa. Africa was a cake, like a cake to them. It was partitioned among Europeans. So the partition, they came here by force, and they came with something called the Maxim gun. In fact, they used to laugh off Africans because to them they had the Maxim gun. But now the Africans, we only had spears. We only had stones as our instruments to defend ourselves. But Africans were not ready for the invasion. All in all, because of the conditions back at home, they manipulated us and we were subdued. And so Africa went through three folds. The first fold was the fold of European pacification, where Europe was here to now take the land of Africa by force. Africans didn't accept. Even the cheaters that they colonized, they collaborated. They never collaborated. Either they were cheated to collaborate or they were lured with some things to collaborate. But later on, for discovering that they've been cheated, all of them opted to fight back. A good example is Kabaka Mwanga of the Buganda Kingdom. He agreed, yes, let me work with you. But now after discovering that he had become a mere puppet, Mwanga resisted the European rule. And as a result of that, they arrested him and deported him to Kisimayu, where he died after he was released, coming back home. He died on the way. Where he was born, where he was buried, we don't know. That's the first phase of European pacification. The second phase is under the phase of European accommodation. Africans now knew we have been defeated, we have been subdued. So what can we do? Let us just accept their rule. Let us just work with them. So in that phase, runs from around 1910 to around 1930. That's phase of accommodation. Africans have accepted the European way of life, such as labor, forced labor, taxation, and alienation. All those, including Christianity, we had accepted. Let us work with them. But now, that phase was accompanied by some discomfortability, especially among Africans. Africans were never certain. They were never that good with those things that European had brought to us. And so, in 1930s, the world was changing. We had the Great Depression of 1929, the Great Depression of 1931. It was affecting Europe, yes, with America, but the same was being felt in Africa, because European economies were operating in Africa on a very large verge. For example, Kenya was under British. British were here, and because of the depression, they used to increase prices for goods. Because of the Great Depression, they used to force Africans to work for long hours for them to get money. The same happened in Portugal. This phase, Portuguese in Mozambique were now putting more pressure on Africans to work for many hours with little or no pay, to pay as more taxes as possible for the European problem of the Great Depression of 1929 and 1939. After that phase, we now have the phase of African nationalism. Africans thought it was now rape for them now to take weapons to fight the so-called the white man. So that phase was supported by the Second World War, which was fought from 1939 1945. The World War saw the whole world being taken into European affairs. It was first European tribal wars, which were later converted to what we now call the World War, where all people in the world were now dragged in European messes, European affairs. We had Norway, Africans were taken to go and fight on different frontiers for different European countries. For example, in Kenya, we were taken to go and fight in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Burma. The French did so, taking Africans into the war without seeking their right conscience, so as to be quotas, some were army. But now that one was a motivation, because after that Africans came back home and they were determined now not only to ask peaceful for independence, but now to take arms to fight Europeans. So how did the Second World War contribute to African nationalism? It was a good thing for Africa. Why? Because, number one, Africans knew how to use European weapons well. So they came back knowing that we can take arms and fight them, just like the way they used to fight other Europeans in different frontiers in the interwar period. Then number two, the Second World War made Africans aware that Europeans can die. Europeans can die. Previously, they didn't know that Europeans can die because they thought that Europeans were like gods. But during the war, they saw them wailing, dying. As a result of that, they came back with confidence. It can be done. Then the third reason, which is not the last one, after the Second World War, we had two brothers who emerged, cuts of the war, as a superpowers. The first one was USA, United States of America. The second one was USSR, Union of Soviet Russia. So the two brothers began to champion for the release or for the decolonization of Africa. Why were they interested? Had God visited them for them now to come and liberate us? No. They wanted Africa to be free, for them also to have a share. They knew when Europe was here controlling us, they couldn't get the fair share of what they wanted. So they were pushing Europeans to leave Africa for them to have a fair share, for them also to loot, because they were envious. So they began to champion for more changes toward decolonization, the two bigger brothers, USA and USSR. The first reason why Second World War was good for Africa was because after the war, they formed a body called United Nations Organization in 1945 in San Francisco in USA. So UN was formed by independent countries where it said to have world peace, all people had the mandate to take care of their own affairs, and a colonized nation could not take care of our own affairs. And that's why UN stipulated that all Africans should be set free, not only Africa, but other countries in the world, including the Asian countries. The last reason that favored decolonization in Africa, at least it was the influence of the people who had gotten Western education. In Kenya, we had Jomo Kenyatta. In Ghana, we had Kwame Nkrumah. In Senegal, we had Leopold Sedar Senghor. In Mozambique, we had people like Eduardo Mondlane. In Malawi, we had Kamuzu Banda. So them had the education. And I normally say the whole of education is not to help you get employment. No, to help you to articulate your ideas well to all without discrimination. So the people who had gotten high education had the mind that it can be done if we decide. Meet me later in the same.